Squatter. Living in the middle of nowhere in rural northern Alabama has pros and cons. I'm not a hermit, despite what the local HOA thinks. I work a job, use modern technology, pay bills and taxes, etc. I simply prefer to live my life in solitude, surrounded by nature. My small cabin is buried up in the woods. The driveway is a little over a mile long. It's a small place. I don't need much room since it's just me and my two cats, Herbert and Ash. It's a simple one-story house, one bed, one bath, a kitchen and living area, and a semi-large office space. The only other area is the large outdoor garage. The garage isn't connected to the house. In all honesty, it's a glorified car park with a really big shed that I use for storage and projects. Most of the time, I leave the building unlocked. There is nothing of value in the shed, the most valuable thing being an electric buzz saw that cost me a pretty penny. The other reason I felt no need to lock it was because nobody ever came down my driveway. I'm in the middle of nowhere, so not many people drove past the driveway anyways, but the damn thing is over a mile long. I've learned there are very few people who want a driveway that long, let alone want to explore one. So, when I heard some movement in the old shed, I just assumed it was a raccoon or a possum that had made its way into the building. Winter was on its way, and it made sense that the small critters would want shelter from the colder winds. I didn't let my cats out for a while, worried that they would get into the shed and get into trouble. A few weeks went by, and now and then I would hear some noises. Since the noises were so faint and far and few in between, I just didn't think much of it. A part of me wishes I had. I wish that I had investigated, maybe even kicked the critters out. But one afternoon, I had enough. When I got home and out of my car, I wanted nothing more than a strong gin and tonic. As I shut the car door, I noticed that the shed door was slightly ajar. Even though I left it unlocked, I was sure that I had shut the door. Fear crashed through me like a lightning bolt. My first thought was that Herbert and/or Ash had wandered outside and gotten into the shed. I briskly walked over to the shed and threw open the door, only to be met with a horrid sight. I was right, kind of. A small raccoon had gotten into my shed, but something else got into the poor critter. There was blood on the floor. I could see a large gash in the thing's side. Sunlight poured into the shed, turning the once cozy work shed into a fire red-orange that reminded me of Hell's Walls. Unfortunately, the raccoon wasn't the worst part of it. Standing along the back wall of the shed was a man. He was much taller than me, but he appeared to be thin and frail. I could see the outlines of his ribs. His arms resembled uncooked spaghetti noodles. He was so disproportionate. Another wave of fear and adrenaline surged through my veins. An unknown man was standing in my fucking shed, eating a raccoon. A part of me wanted to vomit. Another part of me wanted to turn and run. I felt rooted to the ground. My feet wouldn't respond to my commands. His head snapped in my direction, and he didn't waste a second. Lunging at me, I screamed. We fell to the floor, and I could feel his hands around my throat. I struggled against him, fearing for my life. I didn't want to die. I wasn't ready to go. I clawed at his hands, feeling my long nails puncture through his thin skin. Blood dribbled down his fingers and landed on my neck, the substance burning and heavy. My right hand fell to the side, reaching for a small handsaw that was sitting on the ground. I wasn't sure when or how it had ended up there, but that was the least of my concerns. I brought it up, slamming it into the man's arm. He let go, letting out a guttural scream. He shot away from my form as I rolled over and tried to catch my breath. Glancing up at him, I could see him grasping his arm and trying to catch his breath. His eyes were wild, panic and fear written all over his face. I don't remember what happened, it's all a blur. I know that at some point, I grabbed the handsaw once more, and then I was on top of him. There was blood, so much blood, and it was everywhere. He stopped screaming and stopped moving, and at some point, I realized he was dead. The rest of the evening was a blur. I got up, adrenaline still racing its way through my system. I ended up in the bathroom of my home, washing the blood off my hands and scrubbing under my nails. Hyperventilating, the realization crashed into me that I had actually just killed a man. I vomited, emptying the nothing in my stomach into the toilet. I felt too disgusting. I felt horrid and vulnerable. I was on the floor, breathing fast and rapidly. Herbert came into the room at some point and shoved his head up against my thigh. Hours went by, and I hadn't moved from my spot on the bathroom floor. I had cried, had a panic attack, vomited 2 more times, and now I was just sitting here, numb. Herbert had fallen asleep a while ago. He seemed so peaceful. Ash had joined us. He brought his favorite tuna fish can stuffed play toy and curled up next to Herbert. I just sat there, unsure of what to do. Was I supposed to call the cops? In Alabama, we had the self-defense laws, but I couldn't bring myself to move and pick up the phone. I certainly couldn't leave him there either. I began to cry again, and at some point, I fell asleep on my bathroom floor. I didn't go to work the next day, too concerned with what had occurred the previous evening. I decided against calling the cops. I was too afraid. I knew I had to find some way to get rid of the body, and when I saw a small bear running through my backyard, the perfect idea dawned on me. I wasn't sure why exactly the bear wasn't hibernating yet, but I didn't complain. 2 days after the ordeal, I got home and poured myself a drink. I took it with me to the shed, getting myself ready to do what I needed to do. Throwing open the shed door, and the body was disgusting. I nearly vomited again from the smell alone, but I pushed through. His skin was a blue color, and the blood around his body had dried up. I pushed on, grabbing one of his arms lightly. I was shaking as I grabbed the same hand I had originally stabbed him with and began to cut off the arm. When it hit bone, that's when the tears started to fall. It was scary, trying to cut up a person, and I just couldn't get this stupid handsaw through his bones. I gave up. No. A better word is I got fed up. I was crying hot, angry tears as I grabbed his other arm and then pulled. He was heavy, the little muscle he had weighed heavy. I pulled him out of the shed door and Tiro the backyard all the way to the edge of the woods. I left him there. I don't know how to explain it, but I knew that bear would be back. I wandered back inside slowly, Herbert brushing up against my legs as I entered the home. I washed my hands again, then decided that wasn't enough, so I showered. That night, I cried myself to sleep. I couldn't think, sleep, eat, drink, anything. I thought this would be easy, just dispose of him and get this over with. Sobbing quietly, I felt Herbert crawl up close to my head. Ash slept peacefully at the foot of the bed. The two of them were a stark contrast to my current feelings. I didn't know how to live with myself, knowing I had killed and squatter living in my shed.